Video game development is not always about reading the room, sometimes it's about taking a risk. In order to stay fresh, franchises need to do new things, but they can't always be the expected, otherwise they run the risk of making their audience tune out. We as gamers crave wild and amazing things that were previously unthinkable. We need to be kept on our toes. This list will highlight the times that iconic franchises put out spin-offs that absolutely nobody saw coming, or maybe even downright didn't want, and yet they turned out to be the best kind of surprises. I'm Si for WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 video game spin-offs nobody asked for that were awesome. Number 10. Hooked on You, a Dead by Daylight dating sim. Dead by Daylight is an asymmetrical online survival game where 4 players do their best to escape the 5th, who is controlling one of the game's many powerful killers. It's known just as much for its crossover potential as it is for just how damn thirsty a portion of its fanbase is. Asking developers Behaviour Interactive to add sexy times to Dead by Daylight became a community meme years ago and has persisted ever since. Even the people who are serious about such an idea scarcely expect it to actually happen. Most likely that they also didn't anticipate that the developers would tip their hat to this themselves with a decidedly unexpected spin-off. Dropping the player onto a desert island with 4 of the title's original killers, the cute little $10 non-canon side game Hooked on You is purely made for the giggles and allows the typically serious and violent nature of Dead by Daylight to take a rest in lieu of levity and fourth wall breaking antics. Whilst it might make some of DBD's most hardcore of fans hot under the collar, it's also just silly, fluffy fun for just about anyone remotely aware of the characters, as it pokes at the tropes of the genre and the franchise at large. Number 9. Gears Tactics. It's fairly commonly known video game trivia that the Microsoft Xbox juggernaut IP Halo started off as a strategy game before it completely morphed into a generation-defining FPS. It wasn't entirely unthinkable that it might end up looping back to where it started before 2009's Halo Wars. However, Microsoft's other exclusive shooter doing the same thing was far less anticipated. After all, Gears of War had third-person action game in its blood. Even in the original release, it had such a defined identity that only got better over time as it ironed out the kinks and sharpened the edges. Considering that the core gameplay loop of the series is slamming armour-clad, muscle-bound soldiers behind cover, blasting monsters when the right opportunity arises, and then moving on to the next piece of cover, it actually makes a lot of sense. Basically, Gears Tactics' move to RTS just changes the perspective and the pace of the standard affair. The tone remains the same. By no means perfect, Gears Tactics works wonderfully as the first entry into a potentially very promising side series. It offers at least a little more thinking and planning into a franchise which has often always been about brute force spray and pray. Number 8. Donkey KONGA. When developers Rare left Nintendo to sign with Microsoft, there was no greater impact than the one it had on the Donkey Kong franchise. After revitalising it for the 1990s with the Country games and Donkey Kong 64, the series was now out at sea without its appointed and trusted captain to guide it. With Mario and Zelda leading the 3D platforming space for the company, DK and friends had to find a new niche to occupy. As the rhythm game genre became more popular, developers Bandai Namco had a proposition for Nintendo that nobody could have predicted. I mean, what screams Donkey Kong more than smashing your hands on a bizarre bongo controller to the beat of Blink 182? Strangely though, it worked. Donkey KONGA was that combination of Nintendo's simplicity and charm that made DK's take on the growing interest in music games interesting, requiring clapping and tapping on one of the most unique looking peripherals ever. Donkey Kong could have become a good-humoured RPG, banana-based FPS, or even some kind of RTS or something, but the root of music game was a warm surprise. Donkey KONGA birthed 2 sequels and a spin-off of its own in Jungle Beat that used the bongo controller in a more traditional 2D platforming setting. Number 7. Dead Space Extraction. There were plenty of comparisons to be made between the original Dead Space and Resident Evil 4, which years prior had revitalised the third-person action genre and taken video game horror in a new direction. Dead Space calmed down on RE4's absurdity and set itself aboard the quiet, cramped and chilling corridors of the USG Ishimura and was a hit in its own right. As a genuinely unnerving and gory horror game, it's not surprising that Dead Space never came to the Wii. However, that's not to say that the franchise never ventured there. In 2011, Dead Space took another leaf out of the Resident Evil playbook by taking its horror on rails with an arcade-style shooter for the Nintendo home console by the name of Dead Space Extraction. Acting as a prequel, it showed an earlier look at the ship's downfall with some truly remarkable visuals for the time, as well as plenty of replay value. Whilst sales numbers were pretty low, the actual quality of the game should have been enough to bring Dead Space fans to the console. It's not a cheap throwaway title for the sake of putting the series' name on every platform. Extraction is well worth your time and a space in your Wii collection, a dark horse amongst the usual bright and colourful affairs on Nintendo systems. Number 6. Luigi's Mansion. Despite not being the name on the poster, many sidekicks of major heroes are just as beloved. The series might be called Super Mario, but the plumber's younger sibling has just as many fans. For a long time though, he was simply Player 2. After all, when Mario went fully 3D for the Nintendo 64, his brother had no place in the title and was nowhere to be found. It was a swift 180-degree turn then to launch the Nintendo GameCube with Luigi's first real opportunity to shine. What needs to be understood is that before Luigi's Mansion, the younger brother was far less defined as a character. For a time, he was just a lankier Mario with an extra high jump. There had been some references to his more sensitive soul, but it was this game that really carved out Luigi's niche as the pragmatic fraidy cat that we all now know today. The idea of Luigi having his own starring role wasn't completely impossible, but nobody expected such a wild shift. After all, until now, the Mario series was largely all about running and jumping. Not only did Luigi's Mansion help to define Luigi's temperament, but it also gave him his own playstyle as he cautiously skulked through haunted abodes, interacted with his environments, solved puzzles, and ghostbusted his way to side series success. Number 5. Apex Legends. As development on Titanfall 2 wrapped up, Respawn Entertainment got to work on devising concepts for a new game. They found that, whilst they were keen to craft a battle royale shooter, Titanfall's trademark mechas didn't really feel right within the genre. Instead, they focused on class-driven characters that allowed for faster and more fluid gameplay. Whilst Titanfall 2 had some rather unfortunate timing on its launch and therefore suffered in sales, there was and is life in the universe yet. However, fans didn't expect the follow-up to do away with what felt like the biggest piece of the franchise's puzzle, not to mention the drive towards more single-player experiences. Apex Legends launched to huge aplomb, however, fracturing the Battle Royale space and scooping up lots of players looking for their game of choice in the genre. Combining the best of the character-based squad shooter and Battle Royale rule set, Apex found a gap in the market and made itself one of the most played games in history. Apex's quality, legacy and continued support casts a big shadow over the origin of the IP. Whilst the development of a Titanfall 3 continues to be a large question mark, it's impossible to deny the success that Apex Legends has had, even foregoing the comparison. Number 4. Pokémon Snap. It's a no-brainer that what was so enrapturing back when the Pokémon series first graced the video game industry was the creatures themselves. A world of magical pets that are legally allowed to beat up other people's pets, the universe was calling for all kinds of expansion. In retrospect, a safari of the Pokémon world makes total sense, but it was hardly the first thing on fans' minds. A translation of the established playstyle from Game Boy to home console with 3D renders of every Pokémon was something players were already asking for and would be doing for years to come. Nobody could have predicted a Pokémon photography game, least of all Nintendo, and the project only came to fruition because of a prototype for an unrelated title that needed a hook. Pokémon was inspired by the bug-hunting childhood of creator Satoshi Tajiri, so in the same nature-loving way, animal photography made sense. Pokémon Snap is one of the first spin-offs that the series ever produced, and despite being an extremely short title, its chilled and charming presentation made it a fan favourite for a very long time. After all, sometimes you don't want to send your Raichu out to commit atrocities in the name of collecting gym badges. Sometimes you just want to snap a few pics of Lapras. Number 3. THEATRHYTHM Final Fantasy. Whatever you think of the series and its various entries, it's a pretty unanimously held opinion that the soundtracks of Final Fantasy have always been stellar. From the bleeps and bloops of the NES main theme that still pervades through the series today, to the orchestral bombast of tracks like One Winged Angel. Nobuo Uematsu has a good shot of being named one of the most versatile and enduring composers in video game history. To produce a whole video game about the music, though, was a stroke of genius. As a celebration of the soundtracks of the Final Fantasy games, Square Enix released a pair of titles in the 2010s under the name THEATRHYTHM and THEATRHYTHM Curtain Call. Using the 3DS's touchscreen, the gameplay is fairly simple but combines the taps and swipes of the rhythm genre with Final Fantasy's RPG standards. Better accuracy means more experience points to upgrade your chibi characters from the series' 25+ year history. Curtain Call, the sequel, has over 200 tracks to play along with. To have all of this incredible music in one place feels truly special. Final Fantasy has done its best to tug at the nostalgic heartstrings of fans in recent years with various spin-offs, often vapid and soulless. THEATRHYTHM is surprisingly charming and perhaps the most genuine of the bunch, feeling like a true acknowledgement of the work of Nobuo Uematsu. Number 2. Mario plus Rabbids Kingdom Battle. Information about the existence of Mario plus Rabbids Kingdom Battle began to leak nearly a year before the project was seen for the first time, but it was such a ludicrous thing that most people paid absolutely no mind to it. When the reveal was finally made, gamers everywhere were outright flabbergasted. First of all, Nintendo are pretty restrictive about their own properties, and you don't get anything more precious than Super Mario. Secondly, many thought the Rabbids characters were the gaming equivalent of the obnoxious and painfully unstoppable Minions mascots. It got even weirder when Mario started brandishing a gun and taking cover in what turned out to be an XCOM-style tactical shooter. Honestly, even with a sequel on the way, it still feels like a fever dream or a drunken bet, but all the same, this crossover event was an early success for the Nintendo Switch. Critics praised its sense of style, charm, and love for both franchises. In places, it was genuinely quite funny, and from a gameplay perspective, it was surprisingly addictive. Not only did nobody ask for this one, it seemed like an unfathomable thing that it would work tonally or even in terms of entertainment value, but it was a surprisingly deep and full-length tactical adventure well worth the money. Number 1. Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance. Opinions on it might have softened since, but upon release, Metal Gear Solid 2 was a controversial direction for the series to take. Abandoning the beloved Solid Snake in favour of new protagonist Raiden upset many. The character maintained a prominent position in the series moving forward, but few expected him to have his own starring role ever again. With Solid Snake's story coming to an end in MGS4, Konami and Hideo Kojima started teasing the next stage of the franchise. A poster with a now cybernetically enhanced Ninja Raiden was labelled as Metal Gear Rising and the next MGS story, and fan reaction was one of concern, confusion, and outright disapproval. Once the worries about the protagonist choice had dialed down, a look at the wild gameplay shift caught fans off guard yet again. Wielding dual katanas at groups of enemies, it was a far cry from the standard fare of the series. Many were hesitant, but Metal Gear Solid Rising: Revengeance turned out to be an exhilarating and polished experience. Raiden was finally vindicated as a playable character, and the performance of the game made a lot of the naysayers on the way to its release suddenly very quiet. Maybe it's better to wait and see how a game actually plays before you cast the first stone. And that's the list. Let us know what you thought of this video down in the comments below. Which of these games is your favourite, and any other spin-offs you can think of that you didn't expect but turned out to be, well, excellent actually. Make sure you like this video, share it with your friends, subscribe and hit the notification bell. I've been Cy for WhatCulture, and have a good week.